Welcome to this deep dive for the Transfer Ready by Succession Strength podcast. Imagine finding out that the three giant, beautifully bound binders of corporate policy, the ones you just paid consultants $100,000 to write, ended up costing you $2.5 million in your company's sale.
Oh, yeah. It happens way more often than people think.
Right. So today, we're opening up our own internal files. We're going to look at what we call the $10 million illusion. We're talking about the massive and, frankly, really dangerous gap between what looks good on paper, which we call paper compliance, and what actually functions in the real world.
Which is operational evidence. And it is a gap that just completely blindsides people on both sides of the negotiating table.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if you're a business owner, you look at those heavy binders and you think, well, this proves my maturity to a buyer, right?
You feel secure.
Exactly. And if you're an investor, those hundreds of pages of legal jargon and flowcharts, they create this sort of psychological safety net. You see a comprehensive policy and you just assume the company is this well-oiled machine.
You just assume the behavior matches the formatting.
Exactly. But you completely miss the fact that having a plan written down is, it's practically meaningless if a company hasn't relentlessly tested its ability to actually execute it.
Right. So whether you are a founder trying to get your company ready for succession, or an investor trying to avoid acquiring a company that's basically going to collapse the second a crisis hits, you really need to understand this framework.
You do. Or you're in for a very rude awakening.
For sure. We're going to show you how looking compliant on paper is pretty much the fastest way to kill your valuation or inherit a total nightmare. So let's look at a specific post-mortem from our files. This was a logistics provider targeted for a $10 million acquisition by a private equity fund.
Right. And by all initial measures, this target company was the absolute picture of an ideal acquisition.
The golden child.
Yeah, exactly. The private equity fund's diligence team comes in, and the logistics company's executive team, they present the golden trifecta. They literally slide these three thick binders across the mahogany table.
Just a thud.
Right. And it's comprehensive business continuity plans, exhaustive vendor risk assessments, highly detailed incident response procedures. It looks incredible.
I look at this scenario, and to me, it's exactly like buying a used, high-end luxury car. You open the glove box, and you find this pristine, leather-bound owner's manual.
Yeah.
The pages are crisp, it smells like a new book, and it tells you exactly how the engine is supposed to run.
Sure.
But then you ask the owner for the maintenance receipts, and they have nothing. Literally nothing showing they've ever actually changed the oil.
It's all theoretical.
Exactly. You have the manual, but you have zero operational evidence that the engine isn't going to just blow up on the highway the moment you drive it off the lot.
That's a great analogy. And the scary part is buyers fall for the pristine manual all the time.
Really?
Oh.
Even sophisticated buyers.
Oh, all the time. In the M&A world, a really impressive presentation just lulls diligence teams to sleep. You see a beautifully formatted risk assessment, and you just subconsciously assume that the behavior of the employees is going to match the quality of the formatting.
Right, because it looks official.
Yeah, but reading a procedure and surviving an actual crisis, those are two entirely different universes. The illusion only falls apart when a buyer actually stops reading the material and starts verifying it.
Right, but a smart buyer doesn't just read the manual. They check under the hood.
Exactly.
And in this specific deal, the turn from reading to verifying happened over just this one single, highly specific request. The private equity fund's operational team sat down with the target company's CFO and simply said, show us the last test of your business continuity plan.
And the CFO, who was clearly expecting this to just be a routine check-the-box moment, he confidently opens one of the binders, points to a document dated 6 months prior, and says, well, we tested the plan. It's right here.
Check, done.
Right. But the analysts pushed past the claim. They asked for the raw data.
Which is where it gets messy.
Exactly. They said, who actually participated in this test? What were the specific failure points? Where are the department head sign-offs acknowledging these results?
And the CFO has to basically admit they don't have the receipts, they just have a summary.
Just a summary.
Now, wait, let me push back here for a second, because I think we need to look at this from the seller's perspective.
Okay, Jeff.
If I'm a business owner, I spent months getting my department heads together to map out our processes right.
Yep.
I paid consultants a premium to document this massive comprehensive policy. I have the blueprint.
You do.
Isn't creating the blueprint at least like 80% of the battle? If they ran some kind of test 6 months ago and took the time to write a summary, why is the word summary such an immediate, massive red flag to a sophisticated buyer?
Because a summary written from memory is a narrative. It is not evidence.
Ah, a narrative.
Yeah, and narratives are subject to human nature. When you write a summary of a disaster test weeks or even just days after the fact, you inevitably gloss over the messy human elements.
You make yourself look better.
Of course you do. You write down that the backup server successfully came online, but you completely omit the fact that it took your lead engineer 4 hours of total panic to find the right encryption key, because the password protocol wasn't documented correctly.
Wow, okay.
A cleanly written summary is always a sanitized version of reality.
So it hides the actual vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
The things that could take the company down.
Precisely. A summary lacks the raw system logs showing exact downtime. It lacks the calendar invites and attendance records proving the actual decision makers were in the room.
Instead of just delegating it to junior staff.
Exactly. But honestly, the biggest red flag of all is that a summary from memory almost never includes a rigorous list of post-test action items.
Right.
If you run a genuine stress test on a complex logistics company, things are going to break. That is the fundamental purpose of the test. You are supposed to find the gaps so you can assign action items to fix them.
So if there are no action items,
If you hand me a summary that says, everything went perfectly, it proves to me that your plan is just a static, dead document. It is not a living capability.
that makes total sense. If you didn't find anything broken, you didn't actually test the system.
You just read it aloud.
Yeah. And because the diligence team caught them in this one sanitized summary, trust completely evaporated. It triggers what we call the contagion effect.
Right, it spreads.
The buyer didn't just walk away immediately, right? Instead, that one single missing set of raw logs triggered a microscopic, super aggressive audit of the target company's entire operational evidence across the board.
And the pattern they uncovered was devastating for the seller. Devastating.
Oh, I bet.
The fund discovered that policies existed for absolutely everything, but the proof of execution existed for nothing.
It was ghost town.
Let's just break down how deep this illusion went. Take their vendor oversight, for example. In the binder, the vendor risk management framework sounded incredibly robust.
Looked great on paper.
Fantastic on paper. But in reality, when the diligence team looked for the operational evidence, the vendor oversight was literally just a static spreadsheet of names and phone numbers.
Oh, wow. Which is terrifying for a logistics provider.
Beyond terrifying.
I mean, if your entire business model relies on third-party trucking fleets, port authorities, warehouse operators, a spreadsheet is not readiness. They had no vendor tiering.
None.
And for you listening who might not build these frameworks every day, tiering isn't just ranking your favorite partners. Tiering means mathematically categorizing your vendors based on their criticality to your survival.
Right.
A Tier 1 vendor is someone whose failure stops your revenue within 24 hours. A Tier 3 vendor supplies the break room coffee.
Exactly.
If you haven't tiered them, you treat them all with the exact same level of urgency.
And because they hadn't tiered them, they hadn't done any continuity checks.
Which is?
A continuity check means calling your Tier 1 trucking partner and demanding to see their backup plan if their local depot floods.
Oh, testing the tester.
Exactly. If your primary supplier goes offline, you need a pre-negotiated, pre-tested alternate routing procedure. This company had none of that. If a vendor failed, their entire incident response plan was to call a phone number on a spreadsheet and just hope someone answered.
Yikes. Which brings us to their internal incident response procedure. Again, an impressive-looking document in the binder. But the diligence team found out the target company had never actually run a tabletop exercise.
Never.
This means if a real data breach or a physical supply chain blockade happened, nobody in the executive suite actually knew their role.
Yeah, and for context, a tabletop exercise is the translation layer between paper and reality. It works like this. You lock the CEO, the head of IT, the PR director, and the chief operating officer in a room.
Okay.
You hand them a sealed envelope with the scenario. For example, it is 2 a.m. on a Friday, ransomware has locked all our freight tracking data, and the hackers are demanding $500,000 in Bitcoin. Go.
Just figure it out right now.
Figure it out, and without that practice, you just have panic.
Complete panic.
Complete panic. The IT director is frantically trying to isolate servers. The CEO is yelling for a status update. PR is asking what they are legally required to disclose to customers. If you haven't run that tabletop scenario, your team is literally going to flip through a 400-page binder trying to find the tab labeled ransomware while the business burns to the ground.
It's like reading the manual while the car is on fire.
Exactly. Because in a real crisis, cognitive load maxes out. People do not read manuals in an emergency. They rely entirely on muscle memory. And this team had zero muscle memory.
It's the ultimate fire drill analogy. Having a beautifully illustrated, color-coded map on the wall showing the emergency exits, that is paper compliance.
Sure is.
But actually pulling the fire alarm, forcing 500 employees to stop what they are doing, walk out of the building, and having a safety officer stand in the parking lot with a stopwatch to see who gets stuck in the stairwell that is operational evidence.
Yeah, that's the proof.
This company had a beautiful map, but they had never once pulled the alarm.
And when an investor realizes you've never pulled the alarm, their perception of the risk profile just skyrockets. In M&A, risk is not just a qualitative feeling, It translates directly into a mathematical discount on your valuation.
So let's talk about the hard math of that penalty. The buyer realizes the operational readiness is just a mirage. Do they just walk away? Or do they use this as a weapon at the negotiating table?
Oh, they used it as a massive lever to reprice the deal. The cost of that paper compliance was truly staggering. The private equity fund dropped their valuation of the logistics company by $2.5 million.
Wow.
That is a 25% haircut on a $10 million deal, vaporized at the stroke of a pen.
25%. Now, to you listening, $2.5 million might sound like an arbitrarily large penalty just for missing some test logs, right? Like, how does the diligence team actually calculate a number like that?
Well, it's based on two core factors. First, the risk premium. The buyer is paying for future cash flows. If they realize those cash flows are protected by a paper wall instead of tested operational resilience, the probability of a catastrophic outage ruining the investment goes way up.
Right, so the math changes.
Right, they apply a higher discount rate to the valuation, and second, it's the literal cost of the rebuild. The buyer knows that the day after the deal closes, they are going to have to hire outside operational consultants, pull management off of revenue-generating tasks, and basically fund a massive internal project to build the real evidence systems the seller only pretended to have.
And the seller was reportedly furious.
Oh, livid.
But what could they do? Because their readiness was proven to be entirely hollow, they had absolutely zero leverage left. They had to accept the lower price, literally leaving millions of dollars on the table.
Yeah.
But I want to look at this from the buyer's side for a moment. Did the private equity fund actually win here? Because getting a $2.5 million discount on a $10 million asset sounds like a massive victory.
Yeah.
They got a highly profitable logistics company on sale.
Yeah.
But what is the hidden cost of inheriting a house of cards?
Yeah, that is the crucial question. And the answer really reveals the harsh reality of post-close integration. No, the buyer did not win.
Really? Even with the discount?
Not at all. Because the $2.5 million discount didn't even come close to covering the actual agony of fixing the broken system. It took the fund's operational team 2 full years to rebuild the target's evidence infrastructure from the ground up.
2 years seems excessive. I mean, if they have the money and the resources, why does it take 24 months just to implement proper continuity testing?
Because you aren't just rewriting documents, You are trying to fundamentally change the daily behavior and the psychology of an entire workforce. You are fighting cultural inertia.
People don't want to change.
Exactly. Imagine trying to get a veteran warehouse manager who is used to just quietly fixing logistical hiccups on his own to suddenly follow a rigorous, documented incident logging procedure.
He's going to fight it.
Every step of the way. Imagine getting the procurement department to start aggressively interrogating the cybersecurity posture of a new software vendor instead of just signing the cheapest contract. That is a massive behavioral shift.
So it's not a paperwork backlog, it's a culture war.
Exactly. The drain on time and, most importantly, management attention far exceeded the initial discount. When an investor acquires a company, the investment thesis is built on growth, right? Scaling, market capture.
Right, they want to make money.
Exactly. Instead, for 24 months, the entire executive team was distracted by foundational compliance and operational repair. The opportunity cost of missing 2 years of strategic growth is immeasurable.
So it's a catastrophic lose-lose. The seller loses millions in their exit valuation, and the buyer loses years of strategic momentum acting as a highly paid plumbing crew.
That's a great way to put it.
This makes me want to pivot to the mindset of the seller here. If it takes 2 years of agonizing work to fix, why did the business owner let it get this bad in the first place? Like, were they actively trying to scam the private equity firm?
Not at all. And that's what makes the $10 million illusion so insidious. The seller wasn't acting maliciously. They had genuinely spent years building those policies. They paid real money to external consultants.
Right.
The business owners looked at those heavy compliance binders on the shelf and fell into a very common psychological trap. They mistakenly assumed that having a plan was the exact same thing as being ready.
It's the danger of the check-the-box mentality. You ask, do we have disaster recovery policy? The compliance officer says yes, check. And the executive team feels safe, so they just move on to the next agenda item.
Yep. They fail to operationalize it because verifying is hard, messy work. You feel secure because the document exists, so you never subject it to the stress of reality. For investors listening, this is how you spot the trap before you close a deal. You have to fundamentally change your diligence requests. Stop asking management, do you have a policy? Start explicitly asking for the raw proof of execution.
Ask for the receipts.
You must ask for the messy system logs. You must ask for the sign-off sheets with actual physical signatures from department heads. Ask for the documented action items from their last tabletop exercise. The presence of messy, raw data is actually the highest indicator of true operational maturity.
That's fascinating.
If they can only produce a polished summary, you know the foundation is hollow.
That is incredibly practical for the buyer. But we need to make this practical for the seller, too. How does a business objectively audit itself? Because waiting for a buyer's diligence team to find your gaps and slash your valuation by 25% is totally avoidable disaster.
Absolutely avoidable.
How does a founder surface these hidden gaps before they ever sit down at that negotiation table?
Well, this is where the methodology of a business transition risk diagnostic becomes the critical first step for any business owner preparing for an exit. It is a proactive, internal stress test.
Break down how that diagnostic actually functions. I mean, it's not just hiring another consultant to write another binder, right?
No, it is the exact opposite. The diagnostic fundamentally shifts the entire organization's focus from documentation to execution. Think of it as an internal audit of your muscle memory.
I love that.
Yeah. The diagnostic methodology maps your written policies directly against recent actions. It interrogates the system. Where are the raw logs? Where are the tabletop results? Where is the proof that the vendor tiering was actually updated in the last quarter?
So it's looking for the evidence.
Exactly. It clearly demarcates where a company's readiness is real and where it is dangerously relying on paper compliance.
So it's giving the seller the exact same X-ray vision the buyer's diligence team is going to use, but doing it 12 to 18 months before the sale.
Which is the ultimate leverage. Because if you find the gap during your own internal diagnostic phase, you have the time and the control to fix it.
You can fix the engine before you list the car.
Precisely. You can force the organization to run the tabletop exercise. You can implement the vendor continuity checks. You build the real operational evidence so that when you finally sit down to negotiate, your valuation is bulletproof. You are handing the buyer verifiable proof of capability, not just a fragile promise on paper. You control the narrative because you own the receipts.
And owning the receipts is how you protect your life's work. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, moving from the psychological comfort of those 3 heavy binders to the hard mathematical reality of operational evidence and cultural inertia.
We really did.
I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over. If a major crisis hit your business tomorrow morning, a ransomware attack locking your servers, a catastrophic supply chain failure, or a natural disaster knocking out your primary facility, would your executive team scramble in a panic to find a dusty binder on a shelf, hoping the answers are buried somewhere in page 200? Or would they simply jump into action, relying on the quiet confidence and muscle memory from a real operational stress test they ran just last month? Paper doesn't survive contact with reality. Only evidence does.
Very true.
To measure your operational evidence gap, visit successionstrength.com or email info@successionstrength.com. I highly encourage you to follow the Transfer Ready by Succession Strength podcast for more conversations on what it takes to prepare a business for succession or sale.